for people who watch my channel, people will know that I view Star Trek as a religion. I consider myself a Starfleet officer trapped in the past, whose mission it is to usher humanity into a better first contact, right? Now, what is a religion? A religion is basically a strong belief structure, right? That's set up against, that's upheld with certain stories and characters, how those stories and characters fit together in the timelines and all that kind of stuff. We'll call it religious canon, if you will, right? So Star Trek's canon formed the ideals that I hold true and form the basis of a lot of my thought process today, right? But then you got New Trek, and this is where I start to think I need to view Star Trek in two different ways. I can view it in my classic sense, right, which is canon, or I can view it as my little, 12-year-old person who loves great entertainment and movie self. So, and that brings me into, New Trek, and specifically Strange New Worlds and a few episodes that they've been putting out. And I guess since I'm gonna be talking about Star Trek, I should get into the proper environment myself. Okay, yeah, this environment is a lot more appropriate for what we're going to be talking about. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Trek Canon. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about season 3 of Strange New Worlds. Basically, actually, in a little by extension, a little bit of season 2 and a little bit of season 1. I might throw you in some Picard and stuff like that. Actually, I might just talk totally about New Trek. Period. Okay, look, let me tell you something. Let me tell you something. Back in the original classic Trek, there were some rules and some history that was set up. Okay, Star Trek: Strange New Worlds, when it premiered, right off the bat, start changing a lot of those rules, and that's one of the reasons that I have problems with prequels. Okay, Star Trek should never have been. Besides Enterprise, I thought that that was a great addition. Besides Enterprise, I don't think Star Trek should have had prequels. I think that they should have always moved forward because that's the mission of Star Trek, to boldly go, not to boldly go back, but to boldly go. So anyway, here's the thing. There's some things you guys got to understand, all right? Because with this latest episode where they went, had time shenanigans on top of being a prequel, right? Where you bring in, it's always nice to see Brent Spiner, and all that stuff. It's always nice to bring in Assumes, as being a weird doctors and unethical doctors that they've been, I guess, throughout their whole generation. Okay, because I think Nguyen Soon was just a straight free. Okay, we've talked about Dr. Nguyen Soon. Why all your androids got to look like you, man? Like, what's up with you, man? Why you always, doing. Anyway, we'll get off of, Data and Lore being sex bots. But here's the thing. In Star Trek Enterprise, we were introduced to the concept that there was a temporal war. All right. Now, the thing about a temporal war is that, yeah, you're going to have time incursions. It's going to start changing things, all of that kind of stuff, right? But when we get to Strange New Worlds, they start throwing things off tremendously. I remember, I think it was season 1, where Captain Pike was explaining a little bit of the history of the violence and wars on Earth, right? And they started conflating the eugenics war and World War III with each other when they are two totally separate wars. If I remember correctly, the according to TOS, the eugenics wars took place in like 1992 or something like that, and World War III took place in like 2028 or something, like 2026 or 2028 or something like that, right? And in New Trek, they get them conflated, right? They talk about people leaving Earth, that were astronauts because of the atmosphere being messed up. But then in season, but in Picard, you say something like, okay, well, Picard's, ancestor or something like that had this, real important mission to Mars where she was supposed to get like these microbes to come back and actually save the atmosphere of Earth. Okay, well, maybe she did that, but the information didn't get out around the world before, these other astronauts left Earth because of the atmosphere and everything. But you say to yourself, okay, hold up. If this was such a pivotal moment in history, then it would have been all over newscasts all over the world, right? We still had technology during that time to have global communications, right? So I'm not understanding what they're doing with the timelines and how they're playing with them. And now you're saying, okay, Romulans were in a temporal war. Okay, I could believe that. The outline of that from Enterprise, that looks like a Romulan outline. And when I say a Romulan outline, the haircut, the outline of the uniform, it kind of looked Romulan. I'm not gonna lie about that. I would have rather it been, a Gallifreyan, but okay. a Romulan. Romulans are in the Time War. Now, here's the thing. Introducing a temporal war gave the writers of Star Trek so many opportunities to dive into the exploits of those wars, the ramifications of messing with the timelines and the temporal incursions, the different factions involved in it. Hell, it could have all been centered around the USS Relativity, but that's not what they decided to do. They decided to take a different approach, and let's talk about that approach. Believe that the attention spans of people, younger nowadays is not the same. Okay. If you think about how we used to watch Star Trek used to come on once a week, right? You have to catch it at that time on that station, and if you didn't, you basically had to wait till the next week and hope one day, with reruns or something like that, that you'll see the episode that you missed. Luckily, syndication, Star Trek got into syndication and it played all the time. All right. So you was able to catch up on a lot of your episodes. Now, the thing is this, that took a certain level of patience. Writers had the time, weekly to pen a script, put something down that's thought-provoking, something that'll add, great to canon. And I think that's probably why the stories were so much better back then, because not only were the writers had more time to actually write their stories because of the consumption was a lot less from the public, right? But the public was a lot more patient in seeing a story from its beginning, how it progresses, and its conclusion. Nowadays, people want to see the clicks, what people want to see the, little small shots and stuff like that. So how does a studio balance complex storytelling with keeping the audience engaged every few seconds or every few minutes? And I think the result is, in my opinion, you get writers who rush out episodes of Star Trek or rush out movies of Star Trek that are now resembling more of Star Wars, all of the phaser fire and gunfire and all this type of stuff, instead of the examinations of interpersonal relationships or interplanetary relationships or cultural relationships, or cultural dynamics, any of these things that actually was the focus and reason for Star Trek, right? You get into those types of pitfalls, right? So here's the thing. With New Trek, you get glimpses that they have the possibility of doing great Star Trek. You get episodes like the last one, What is Starfleet, which was an outstanding examination of why Star Trek has been my religion. Okay. No, we didn't go out here. We didn't arm our starships because we're trying to be on some, taking over things or some type of aggression or anything like that. Our first starships came out here on purely exploration with very minimum to no offensive weaponry. Remember the NX-01 was constantly getting his butt kicked and had to come back constantly to get repaired. And they was like, look, it's dangerous out there. We're going to need some phasers. Okay. So I love the fact that they started to explain all that, go into why, the relationships on the ships were so drama free. Originally, Gene Roddenberry designed the Star Trek, the Starship crew interactions to be drama-free as much as possible. If you look at classic Trek, everybody on the ship pretty much got along. All of the drama came from extraterrestrial, reasons from outside the ship. People who visited the ship, people who went from the ship on away missions down to the planet. That was mostly where the interplay drama came from. That changed a lot in Deep Space Nine. But again, Deep Space Nine came out in a time where you still had to play by the rules of, okay, I need to wait a week. So the writers had time, people had patience. And Deep Space Nine is the epitome, I believe, of Star Trek writing. So eventually I was thinking to myself, the way that I could feel better about watching Star Trek was to think about Star Trek basically like this, all right? All different timelines. I think there's about 4 or 5 different Star Trek timelines, all right, or dimensions. We got classic Star Trek and its mirror universe, okay? We have Discovery Star Trek and its mirror universe, okay? We have the Abrams verse, okay? All of these are different examinations of different dimensions or different universes in Star Trek, all right? And we have the universe web of Picard that sits in its own little the series Picard sits in its own little pocket universe, right? And you have, where Discovery, I mean, where Strange New Worlds, Lower Decks, and Prodigy, you have where all of those guys sit, all in their own different dimensions. And I thought to myself, hey, you know what? If I think about it like that, if I think about it like if I was watching that episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, right, where the timeline fracture and all of those enterprises start coming into one universe, right? And then you had Riker come up there with the beard, and everybody was messed up because the Borg was taking over right? And everybody on the Enterprise and from our, universe 616, they was like, yeah, man, we don't want to be in that universe. And people in, 615, they was like, yo, the Borg taking over everything, man. Y'all not finna change the way, y'all not finna put stuff back, man. We gonna shoot at that shuttle. Right. That's why that's how I'm thinking. I'm feeling a lot more comfortable thinking about current Star Trek and how it meshes or a lot of times contradicts or be inconsistent Trek with classic Trek. Nowadays, I sit back and I say, okay, I could blend my religious aspects and my 12-year-old, I want to see excitement every 5 second brain into one thing and say, oh, this one right here is that particular dimension where this was going on in Star Trek. Yeah, this ain't got nothing to do with the right. Oh, this is that dimension right there where the eugenics wars and World War III took place at the same time. Oh, this is that dimension where it was a lot of other scientists who ended up making it on a scavenger ship way out to the rim of the galaxy. Yeah, we know. Yeah, they wasn't able to do that in Star Trek, the original series. But in this one right here, because, in this right here, you got the temporal wars, of course, it was maybe some technology, maybe a new warp engine failed, because, and then this one right here, the Borg, they wasn't able to even scan the Borg on the planet. They had different scanners than the normal Starfleet that we used to. Right. That's how I got to start looking at Star Trek. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't. And as always, peace, recycle, and say to whales, you guys be cool.